Hey guys, how are you doing? This is Zeb from Zed Outdoors and I hope you're having an awesome day. So today I've come down to see friend Andreea Grad. Andreea, how are you doing?
I'm well, Zed. Hi, good to see you.
You too as well. So if you're not familiar with Andreea, Andreea is a very talented craftswoman originally from Romania, currently traveling here in the United Kingdom. And while she's passing through London, which is where we're currently filming, Andreea has kindly taken some time out for me to document her process on how she Kolroses a traditional Romanian design on a wooden spoon. Now this video is actually part of a mini series I'm filming with Andreea. In the previous video, which was a very extensive tutorial on how Andreea carves a traditional Romanian spoon. Now it's actually on that spoon we're going to be doing this Kolrosing design. So before we crack on with the actual meat and bones of this video, a few quick things to mention. Number one, the links to the other videos in the series will be down below in the description. Highly recommend you go check those out. Also, secondly, what Andreea has very kindly done is that she's actually going to be providing the design she's doing in this video as a downloadable template for you to download and actually use yourself. It's completely free to access. What I'm going to do is put a link below in the description and pin to the top of the comments. If you click on that link, you can go to the website and download that for free. Following on from that, what I'm also going to do is put a link to Andreea's website and also her Instagram. Highly recommend you go check those out, see all the work that she gets up to. So like I said in this video, what we're going to be looking at is her process for Kolrosing. Now, one final thing to stress, that all the little segments and chapters in this video have been marked out along the timestamp on this video. If you look in the description, you'll see all the different sections also marked out there. If you look on the left-hand side of that, you'll see timestamps, actual numbers. YouTube has a very cool feature. If you actually click on those numbers, it will jump straight to that particular section. The reason why that's a very useful feature is because this video is designed as a tutorial, as a kind of aid for you to follow along. So as you're following along, rather than having to watch the whole video again, you can jump to a particular section in terms of referencing where you're at in the process of doing it yourself. So without further ado, we shall get on with the rest of this video. Andreea, are you good to go?
Ready?
Right, let's do this. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the rest of this video where Andreea Grad is going to be teaching you how to Kolrose a traditional Romanian design.
Right, ready?
Let's do this.
Good. So this is the spoon we did in the last video. It's cherry, and before we start Kolrosing, make sure that, so in this case we just waited for the spoon to dry. We are starting this video another day. You want to start Kolrosing or chip carving or any kind of decoration on a dry piece of wood. So make sure that you have that and not oiled. You can also burnish it, or if you burnish spoons or whatever, you can absolutely do that beforehand, but just make sure it's dry. What we're going to use, I'm going to go over the tools that we're going to use. We're going to use a pencil that we're going to draw the spoon pattern on. It's a soft pencil. I don't exactly remember which one it was. It's towards the end of its life. We're also going to use a Kolrosing knife. This particular one is made by Lee Stoffer. It's based on a design that I saw a video of Liesel on Instagram. She has a lot of experience doing this and she's tried different knives, and this one, it's a little bit more curved on all directions, so it's very good for curves if you do curves in your designs. So I really like this knife a lot. And if you want to do a complicated pattern that you need a ruler, you can have a ruler as well. I'm going to free draw this pattern since it's quite repetitive and it's not necessarily geometrical, so I'm not going to use a ruler per se, but you can if that feels more comfortable to you. So these are the tools, pretty easy. An eraser, we're going to have an eraser as well if you make mistakes, or once we're going to be done with the pattern, you can just erase the pencil lines. So that's one of the reasons why you don't want this to be oiled, because to erase the pencil on an oiled spoon, it's going to get all smudgy and that's not going to work very well. But yeah, so this is the pattern we're going to do. It's a traditional Romanian pattern. A lot of the times patterns in Romanian design are geometrical. I chose to do for the Kolrosing one something that it's a little bit more flowy and not so geometrical. It's a little bit more feminine. I just felt like it, so that's what we're going to do today. So as you can see, I'm going to go over a little bit as far as the structure of how you place a drawing on a spoon. I think that's also very important when you Kolros or when you do a design on a spoon. What I try to do is create a border of sorts, and you can do that by actually Kolrosing or drawing a border all across, or you can do a design around the spoon on the edge as a border. In this case, we're doing a border by leaving a space. So when you can see here, the drawing, the pattern starts around this imaginary border. So you have a space that goes all around the spoon, and that is the visual border. And you want to have something like that because it just creates more space, more flow, more air, for a lack of a better word, around the design. So that it just, you can see it better, it doesn't feel so crowded, and it leaves the space for the spoon shape to shine and not have the pattern completely cover the actual shape of the spoon. So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to keep that in mind, that there is a border. So when you place the design on a spoon, make sure to leave that. Another part to keep in mind is you will have different kinds of handles, right? Some of them will be straight, some of them will be curved. So if you have, in this case, which is a curved shape that's wider at the middle than is at the top, when you place the design, you will have to adjust to those dimensions. And that means that the pattern in the middle will be just slightly bigger to fit the design. So that's going to flow and be a little bit more pleasant visually on the spoon. Another thing to keep in mind is the pattern of the spoon. And the reason why I chose to do Kolrosing on this spoon particularly is because of the grain. So the grain is quite visible and quite pronounced. If I would have done chip carving on this, excuse me, it would have been a bit too much and too complicated. The pattern of the spoon, the grain of the wood would have fought with the three-dimensional shapes of the chip carving. So I chose to do Kolrosing because it's a little bit more subtle, so both of them will have room to shine in a way. So yeah, that's a little bit about the design. And this is going, as you can see, the shapes are pretty much identical. They're just different sizes. So the shape that we're going to do is basically a leaf. And we have big ones, and we have the medium ones, and we have the little ones. And these ones over here in the center are basically a mirror of the small ones. So it's just two leaves and another set of two. So, and the same with the three, we just have three of them next to each other. So it's going to be a good exercise to practice Kolrosing on repeating the same pattern, repeating the same shape. Also, they are placed differently on the spoon, so you will have a feel of the grain when you do that. The grain of the wood is going this way, straight down, like this. So when you're going to draw these, when we're going to draw these together, you will have a feel of how it feels under the knife to go straight across the grain, or I'm sorry, across the grain or with it. So that's a good practice as well. So yeah, we're going to draw this pattern onto the spoon next and start getting on with it. Great. Okay, so we're going to transfer this pattern. We're going to draw it on the spoon. But before we do that, I wanted to mention a couple of things. So I already mentioned that this is a Kolrosing knife that you can use. It doesn't have to be this way. Sometimes they're completely flat. That's perfect as well. This just happens to be one that I'm playing with for curved lines. Also, you can absolutely do the same chip carving with a Kolrosing with a chip carving knife. This is a chip carving knife that I'm using currently. It's made by Peter Kovac. It's a really wonderful knife. The handle is made by Peter. The blade is made by James Wood, and I really, really like this. You can hold it really close, just as if you are just pinching it this way. And I have here a piece of wood, and by coming really close to the blade, you're only actually working with the tip. When you Kolrose, you just go into the wood about 2 millimeters max. So if you pinch it like this, you can just Kolrose just as easily by using this knife. This particular wood is not very friendly, but you can draw curved lines and just moving the wood around. So a chip carving knife is just as fine. Another option, if you're starting and you have no tools, but your sloyd knife, you can use that as well. And the same idea, you're going to use just the tip of the knife. So because the blade is so long, what I normally do is just wrap tape from the tip all the way around for this length. So you don't risk cutting yourself, and then you end up holding it just exactly the same. You want it covered, of course, so you don't cut yourself, but you will just chip carve this way, if that makes sense. So you'll just have this wrapped and then tighter, and just use this as a Kolrosing knife. It'll be just as fine. So these are the options. I wanted to mention that because you don't necessarily need to buy a tool if you don't need to. If you want to start playing with what you have, if it's something that you like doing, then get a tool. You don't need to get it quite yet until you figure out if you're enjoying doing this. So now that I've covered that, we're going to start drawing this pattern on the spoon. So I hope it's going to be easy to see, just because the grain is quite pronounced and loud. So we said that we're going to leave the border, and because I want you to see that, and sometimes it's really easy to visually have it in case you get carried away and you start drawing and you forget you need to leave a border. Let's just draw it. So I'm going to draw the visual border. Sometimes people like to Kolrose this as well. You can, but because the drawing itself stands pretty well on its own, I'm not going to draw an actual border. Now, another thing to keep in mind is how far down on the handle do you go? And sometimes, if you look at the spoon from the profile, you will see that this particular spoon I designed so that this flat curve is the place where I would put the drawing on, and I would probably stop about there when it starts to curve down into the handle, into the bowl. So I would stop about here. Sometimes the grain itself will dictate. In this case, I would probably stop here as well, just because the grain has something to say on this side. Other times, you can absolutely go all the way down to here, depending on the shape of the spoon. Even in this case, I could go all the way down to this direction, especially with this particular drawing that we're having here. I could drag it all the way down. So just be playful and experiment, and you'll get a sense of how the design fits in a spoon by just practicing really and just getting a visual sense of what you're doing. It's hard to make a decision before you actually see it on the spoon itself, and that will only come with practice. So keep playing with this. So we have the border. Now I'm going to start drawing from the top. And I'm first looking at the actual the design piece, the first little group, the first element. So the whole design is combined of groups of the same pattern. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to look and see how many would it fit on the spoon. One thing that some people who draw on spoons, maybe you do that as well, they like to measure things and they like to think in millimeters, centimeters, and try to measure that and then transfer those numbers onto a spoon. I get lost in numbers, so I really prefer to visually just see how it would fit instead of calculating it. But if calculating is something that you prefer and will make it easier, you can absolutely do that. So I am looking at this and I'm seeing these groups. So I'm going to make some blocks that will tell me how much space do I have and how many patterns, how many clusters of these patterns I can put on the spoon. When I look at this, it would almost fit in a square because they're quite arranged in a way that from the center out they are quite similar in distance. So this will be a square right here. So because I know that I'm playing with squares, I'm going to make slightly square shapes. So I have 1 here, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. I'm pushing it here. And then down here below, we're going to play with this element at the bottom right here. So we know now that we can put about, and I made a mistake here already, because these squares are separated. They have a space in between. So I need to make sure that I leave some space here. So this is where the eraser comes in handy. And you can just easily delete, swipe left. No, you can easily erase and just start again. So we have 1 square. We're going to leave some space. We're going to put another one. We're going to leave some space. And we're going to put another one. Leave some space. And another one. And we're going to stop there. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty much like the spoon. And now we're going to start drawing it. I'm going to start, I hope you can still see this. We're going to start in the middle. So this is the middle of the drawing. And I'm starting in the middle because I want to make sure that everything fits. This is going to be a little bit small. So we have the flower. Then how I'm doing this, I'm going to show you how I'm doing these to match. I'm basically doing the base part. This line, and this line. And that allows me to position it in a way that it's going to be symmetrical. So we have the bottom of these petals, these 2 groups of petals. So I'm going to raise it up a bit more, like this. So now I can create the actual petal like that. And so, and so, and so. So now we've created this group of 4. We have the center, this group of 4, and now we just have to do the little ones in the middle of the bigger petals. So I'm just going to do that just like that. I'm going to do this one below here, and now I'm going to turn the spoon around just because it's easier for me to draw. And so there you have it. This is one of them. Now in this space here, we just have these 2 groups of 3. So I'm going to go right underneath this petal group. So I'm going to draw this here and here. And I'm going to turn the spoon around. So we're doing this one here right now. 1, 2, 3. Just so. Now I'm going to draw this one on the other side. I'm going to turn the spoon around and just do 1, 2, 3. 3 petals. So we have this cluster, these 2, and now we're basically repeating the same thing all the way down. I'm going to start again in the middle, create the 4 petals, just so. And like I said before, these 4 petals are exactly like the ones above. They're just one on top of the other. So we have the top piece and the bottom piece, and that's how you create the 4. Then I'm going to do the petals, the larger petals, the bottom part, just so, right next to each other. That's going to help me keep it symmetrical and close to the center. So they're just semicircles. If you imagine this a big circle, I'm just doing a semicircle. And if you need to do this with a compass or anything, you can, but it's just as if you draw a circle and you just stop halfway through. And now from the top, from the point, I'm going to come into the center, just like so. So now we have a petal. The same on this side. At the bottom, we're doing the same. And now I'm going to turn it around. The same, meeting in the center. And some of the petals are not going to be symmetrical, and that's fine. I like that actually because it just shows you that it's hand-drawn and it's not completely perfect. So we have the middle, the outer layer, the center, the middle layer, and now we're going to do the 4 little ones right here. We're going to start with 1, 2, going to turn it around. So it's the same idea, the same movement all the way across. Again, in the middle, in the space in between the 2 clusters, we have these 3, which are these ones. So I'm going to turn the spoon around and just draw the 3 petals. I'm going to turn it around and draw 3 more here. And now we're going to repeat it again. You can, if you want, instead of going element by element by element, you can put all these in the space in between if you want. That might help you. I just like to go one by one. That's easier for me. So we're going to do the center one again, 4 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do the semicircles right above it. So, and unite just draw, just adjusting them to make sure that they're a little bit pointy. And from the tip to the center, we're going to go in the opposite direction, meaning convex and concave shapes. I'm sure that makes sense just looking. And then find the center and bring the petal down. The same here, find the center and from the tip all the way down. Okay, good. So now that we have the pattern drawn on the spoon, and you don't have to worry about these lines or anything, just focus on the actual pattern that you drew. Now I'm going to start Kolrosing. We're going to start Kolrosing, and I want to start by just talking a little bit about how we're holding the knife, how we're anchoring, where's the spoon, how is it positioned, and all of those things. So we'll set you up for success. So you want the spoon to be flat and solid on a piece of flat surface. In this case, the back of my spoon is a little bit rocky, but that's okay. I can come in and hold it down a little bit closer if I want to. If your pencil is really soft, you can put something on it so you don't smudge it. If your hands are sweaty by nature, all those things that you need to think about, you can just put a piece of tissue right here under your fingers. So the spoon, the pattern surface needs to be flat because you want it to be solid. You want it to not move. You might put quite a bit of force into the knife. You don't have to, but if you want a really dark pigment, a dark pattern, you might want to go a little bit deeper. That's also, I'm going to go on a tangent here, it also depends on the knife that you have. If your knife is a little bit thicker, you can see how quickly the knife becomes thick at the tip. That means that when I go into the wood, it's going to create quite a big indent, so that's going to create a lot of room for pigment. But anyway,
because I think just one thing, if I may interject, is also a thing for people to understand, assuming they've never done Kolrosing before or not familiar with it. Could you also touch on essentially what Kolrosing is?
Yes, of course. So Kolrosing is a technique of engraving into the wood by cutting into the wood. So you can use all these tools that I've spoken about to create a cut into the surface of the wood. And in that cut, we will add oil and a powder of, you can either use cinnamon or coffee, henna, it's a good option. Henna powder, Dan Lawrence turned me on to henna powder, which is fantastic. It creates this little bit of a green powdery effect. So in that groove that you've created with the tool, you insert a pigment mixed with oil and you rub it in really well. And after that, we take what's called a burnishing tool, which is a really hard surfaced, smooth surfaced tool that we rub onto the top of the wood, onto those creases that we've made, those slices that we made into the wood. And that what happens, if you imagine that the cut of the wood is like this, when you start rubbing with a hard surface, maybe it's not that open, but maybe just like this. When you start rubbing with a really hard surface on top of that, those pores, those grooves are going to close. So that is what it's going to keep that pigment in, and it's going to seal in a way your pattern. So that burnishing tool can be an antler, can be a pebble, can be a glass bead, can be the back of a stainless steel spoon, can be anything that's really not porous and smooth and round on the edges. You just don't want to scratch the surface. The wood itself, the spoon itself, it's very easily scratched, so you want to use something that's quite smooth. So that's what Kolrosing is. It's basically creating little tattoos in spoons. That's really what it is. So that's fun and playful. So we talked about how we're going to hold the spoon down. You're basically holding it steady. Now, the knife itself. Most of the knives are made to be held this up high. I don't particularly like that. I don't find it hard. I don't find it easy to control. So I like it to come really, even this one, I would thin this down because I want to be really close towards the tip. That allows me to control the movement quite well. Another piece that you want to be mindful of is you need to have an anchor point when you Kolrose. And that means have your hand down onto the table. That's your anchor point. So from there you can move your wrist, you can move your fingers, and you can move that anchor point when you want to change direction in your Kolrosing, but you need to have it anchored. You don't want to Kolrose with your spoon, with your hand up in the air. For one, it's quite dangerous. You're pressing into a hard piece of wood. You might slip, and you can't quite be precise when you do that. You will have a harder time to follow the lines in a good way if you're not solid on the table or on a hard surface or wherever you're working. Also, when you start, I suggest don't Kolrose on your knee or holding the spoon or something until you get really used with the tool, and the pressure that you put into your tool just stay on a table or on a hard surface away from your body parts. And that's the positioning. So now we can start. So we are Kolrosing. I'm going to do this on a surface on a bigger scale so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm doing. So we're doing these patterns, yeah? It's just leaves, smaller leaves and bigger leaves. So I'm going to Kolrose these so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm holding this down so it's not moving, and I'm holding the knife quite steady. My hand is anchored on the table, and I'm positioning the knife following the curve. So you can see that my knife is not starting straight, is actually right on, as if I'm right on top, following the curve already. I'm going to press into it and gently drag the knife across. If I come into a curve, you can see if you look at my hand, it's already quite turned. I can't safely or precisely keep going. You can once you get once you get a lot of practice, but at this point you can stop and actually adjust your working table, your working surface. So I moved this piece of wood so that my wrist is again in a neutral position. So that way I can continue the curve up until my wrist can't quite move as I'm pressing. So that way you can adjust every step. So you will have still a continuous curve. The same way on the other side. I start at the tip, press, turn my work surface, turn it until I reach the tip. So now we have these two lines, this one and this one. I can do the same thing here. As you can see, I'm starting right on the direction, right on top of the drawing, and just following that, just turning my work surface as I'm going along, keeping the same pressure all the way to the tip. And here I'm going to start at the tip, press, 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 and just turn my work surface all the way down. So that's what we're going to do, just like this. If you erase right now, if we erase the pencil, so most of the pencil is gone, but you can still see the actual Kolrosing, which is it's the actual indentation that we've created from the tool. And we can do the same thing with the little one, which is going to be a little bit more tricky because it's a tight curve. So in this case, we're going to turn our work surface quite a bit. As you can see, just like that. And sometimes, if it's a very short distance that you're traveling with a knife, you can just press, like I'm doing here. Instead of dragging your knife along, you can just press gently onto the surface. So here we have, again, the mark into the wood. And it's all done by the knife.
So one final question on this, a question people may have that are watching, is how much are you pressing into the wood?
That's a great question, and it all depends on how dark of a line you want to create. So if you were to create a line that is, I'm going to try to demonstrate that with a pencil. So if I want a line in the end to look like this and darker and darker and darker, then the pressure that I would put would be very light pressure here, hardly pressing at all. And as I'm going down into the place where I want it to be darker, I'm going to press harder. And what that does, basically, it just creates a deeper groove into the wood. So when you put pigment, you're going to have more pigment into that area and very little pigment into this area. So it all depends on how much of what design you want to create. But if you're just starting, get comfortable with just practice pressing with a pressure that feels comfortable to your fingers, basically. And you will see how much pigment you have left. And if it's too light, all you have to do is press a little harder next time. So that's how you just get used to it. You'll just get used to your own hands. You're going to see at the beginning that it does feel a little bit tiring to the hand. So that's why instead of continuously pressing all the way through, just by adjusting and moving your surface or just pausing, you can give your fingers a rest, and it's going to be more enjoyable as you're finding your way through this and as you're practicing. So don't push yourself too hard, or otherwise it's just not going to be enjoyable. Take breaks, rest your fingers. You can absolutely put the tool down. You can fiddle with it, and that just helps to massage your fingers if you need to. And that's going to give you a sense of how much pressure. Also, the knife that you have is going to dictate how much pressure you need to put. If you have a knife that is very thin at the blade, like a chip carving knife, you can see the difference here. The chip carving knife, it's very thin here, and it's only this much really that goes into the wood. Whereas this one starts getting thick really quickly. So that means that when it gets into the wood, it's going to split it apart quite quickly. Whereas with this, in order to create a thicker line, you'll have to really dig it in a little bit deeper. So that means that you will have to press a little bit deeper. So it's, yeah, that's why I would say eventually it's a good idea to have a Kolrosing knife, or just a knife that it's a little bit thicker at the blade. You can absolutely work with that. The idea is you just need a little bit thicker of a blade, Kolrosing or not Kolrosing knife, however, whatever knife you have, it'll be fine.
And would it be, as a final wrap up, would it be a suggestion that people practice this on scrap bits of wood before attempting it on a finished?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You know, all those spoons that you have that sometimes they don't turn out, or a regular piece of wood, you can just split a little piece of wood, let it dry, and if you want to sand it, or if you want to just flatten it with the axe, like just like this, just create a flat surface. It doesn't have to be big, just a little bit. And you can absolutely practice on any piece of dry wood, harder wood, soft wood. Just get a sense of how wood feels under your knife. Harder wood is going to be a little bit harder to work with. Of course, you have to press harder in it. Soft wood is easy. So yeah, absolutely create little pieces of wood you can Kolrose in and also chip carve in, just for practice, and play with designs. And also it's something that you can do in your free time. You can learn also more about the pressure and different thickness in the line with those practice boards. Yeah. Okay, so let's start Kolrosing this pattern. We're going to start at the top. So again, this is really tight curve, and I'm just going to press basically around the shape that we drew. And don't worry if this is not going to be symmetrical. It doesn't have to be symmetrical. Unless when you do straight lines, it's going to be a little bit harder. So curved lines are quite easy to do, and a little bit easier to get going with. I personally find straight lines to be harder if you're creating a pattern, because they are a little bit harder to keep straight. So as you can see, I'm moving my spoon around a lot. I'm not staying flat and working, twisting my hand. I'm trying to keep my hand as relaxed as I can and as neutral as I can, meaning my wrist is continuing my forearm, and I'm moving a little bit, but as soon as I'm twisting too much, I'm going to turn the spoon. It's easier to turn the spoon, and I have a little bit more control that way. And just going around these curves. When you start on one end, you can absolutely come the other direction from the other end. So really there are no rules. So we did these two. We're going to do this pattern right here, which is a little bit difficult because it's very small right here. And I'm actually going to change knives. So this is the chip carving knife that I was talking about, and that's just because I want to show you how to do that as well. And it's a little bit thinner at the tip, and I have a little bit more room to play with, just because these little patterns are a little bit smaller here. So I am gently following the line, pressing into the wood and just twisting the spoon around so that my knife can follow that shape. Okay, so we did the middle. And I'm going to do the same up here. Sometimes it's also easier to hold the knife steady and just move the spoon. So that's also another technique that you can use. As you can see, my knife is steady. I'm not moving it at all, and I'm just moving the spoon underneath the knife. So that's another way you can do curved. Just like that. At the beginning, I would recommend you don't press so much, and that's just because it's helpful to get used to moving your hand along the pattern. At the beginning, I remember when I was doing this, it was very easy for the knife to split if you're dragging it across the wood, especially if you are along the grain. It's easier to press a little bit less and also pause as you're moving along the lines. Otherwise you risk slipping, and with Kolrosing, if you slip, you can't correct it anymore because you've basically scratched the wood. So when you add pigment, that will show, that scratch will show. It's really hard to avoid inserting pigment into one particular line that you have on a pattern. So just try to just go slow. It's easy to get excited, and if the wood moves, if the spoon, not the spoon, what am I trying to say? If the Kolrosing knife moves quite easily into one area, it doesn't mean that it will be like that all the way along the pattern. If you go across the grain, like I'm doing here, it feels different. So right now I'm going across the grain is going like this. So I'm going straight across, and right here as I'm turning, I'm going with the grain. And when you go with the grain, it feels much easier because you're moving into the channels of the grain, the wood grain. So your tool is going to feel like it's slipping. So you have to adjust the pressure. You have to press a little bit harder when you go across the grain because you're literally cutting across many fibers. And then when you come just right here, I can feel it under my knife. When you come and go with the grain, you will have to go a little bit slower and not press so hard. Here, I'm going across the grain, so I have to press a little bit harder. Yeah, I just have one more. And you can also hear it when you go across the grain. It's just like going with the grain here. It's just cutting a lot of fibers. And one little one. A lot of the times, Kolrosing is quite meditative, particularly creating patterns. Just going and repeating the same pattern over and over again, it can be quite relaxing. maybe not as fun to just watch, but it's quite relaxing. So we did this pattern, and if you move it into the light to some point where you can see that this whole area is flat, but that drawing stands out. So this is how we're going to have all these eventually, just one by one. We're going to do this little one as well. It's quite rewarding actually at the end of a Kolrosing session to see the pattern in the wood. It really feels quite satisfying that you've put that onto the wood and it's there to stay. Okay, like that. So repeating the same movement, like I was saying before, can be a really good exercise for you to get used to doing curves. This is going to help quite a bit in learning the feel of the wood underneath the tool, just because you're going across different areas of the wood in different directions. So eventually, after doing quite a few of these, you'll just learn. It's just going to turn into a muscle memory. If you pay attention, it's going to be helpful to pay attention to this as you're doing it. And that way you will get your fingers are going to have a muscle memory. So what I'm doing now is I'm correcting things, and because I can't quite see it looking down straight from the top, but if I tilt it slightly, I can see the cuts of the wood, so I can tell that some lines are not meeting and some lines are not touching, so I'm just adjusting that a little bit. So we're going to just keep going all the way down and just finish this, and we'll see how it looks at the end. Okay, so we have finished Kolrosing the spoon, put the pattern on. Now, I did a little bit of that already, but I see that there's a bit more. We can just erase the drawing that we did with just a regular eraser. That's going to clean up the pencil marks. The next thing, we're going to oil the spoon. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that when we put the cinnamon on, that cinnamon is not going to get into the grain around the pattern. So that's going to keep our design a little bit more clean. So even when you put the oil on the spoon, the pattern will pop already. So as I oil the spoon, you can see that you can start seeing the pattern already.
And what oil are you using?
This is just walnut oil. It's one of my favorites. You can easily access it at the stores. It's just regular walnut oil. So now that that's oiled, we're going to add the cinnamon, and this is just as fine as cinnamon powder as you can get. And I'm just gonna rub it in really well. And that's, as you can see, it just gets into those grooves that we've created with a knife.
And what are the other things people can use aside from cinnamon?
You can use coffee, like coffee grinds, ground really fine ground coffee. You can use henna powder, as I was saying. You can use, some people use cloves, but cinnamon is the most common one. That's pretty easy. So we have that. Cinnamon powder on, oil at the bin underneath that. I'm going to put some oil on top, and look how beautiful that just pops really well. So the pattern is quite visible, and this is where you can see that you might want to go deeper in certain parts, or and that's where you can adjust, and where you can see when you put the oil on, before you add the cinnamon, you can check to see how the pattern is. Maybe there are some points where the lines don't meet, or maybe you forgot to do one line, so that's where you can adjust and correct your design. And it seems like we did a pretty good job with this. So now the next part is to start burnishing it. And by burnishing it, I was saying earlier, you just use a very hard surface tool, round and smooth, and rub it really hard onto the wood, and that's going to close those lines that we cut into the wood that now have cinnamon in it, and it's going to basically seal that pattern into the wood. So with quite strong pressure, I'm just rubbing the wood and just rubbing over the pattern. And the reason why you want it to be round is because you don't want to scratch the surface.
And also you're using a slightly wider surface area
Yes.
of the burnishing tool.
Yes, exactly. So that's it. This is pretty much it. I'm going to just add a little bit more oil just to make sure that that's staying. I'm gonna burnish a bit more, and then I just rub the oil and the rest of the cinnamon off the spoon. And at this point, you don't risk, so don't worry that you're rubbing the whole thing off. It's actually inside the wood, so you're fine to leave it like that. So I'm going to oil the rest of the spoon as well, so you can see the whole thing, because this is not oiled. Just want to see how the bowl, always want to see how the bowl looks like. This beautiful pattern, and the grain really pops really well.
And a reminder of what the wood was.
This was cherry, so we just worked with some cherry when we carved the spoon. And I usually just put some in the bowl and then kind of go all the way around. It's one of my favorite parts of making a spoon, is to oil it and see how the grain looks like. So I'm just covering it everywhere, and I massage it a little bit just so it just make sure that it gets into the grain really well, and I usually wipe it off right after. And don't worry, you're not wiping it all off, you're just taking the bulk of it. There's going to be a thin layer of oil left, and that's what you want to leave to dry. I'm just going to clean up a little bit here. Some of the cinnamon got in. Just really gently rub it off. So there you have it. This is the spoon. We carved it, and then we cold-roast it. So this is a Romanian pattern, and that's how you put it on the spoon.
So there you have it, my friends. That is a wrap for this video. Andrea, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zed. That was fun.
Yeah, it was really, really nice seeing your process. Even though I'm filming, I've not actually seen the entirety of a process before, so it was really insightful for me to see how you approached everything and all the nuances.
Yeah, thank you.
So guys, just to kind of wrap up on this video, a few reminders. Number one, Andrea has very kindly provided a downloadable template of this design that she did on the video, completely free to access. Link to that too will be down in the description below, as well as pinned to the top of the comments. Definitely go and click on that, check that out, and give this a go. And once again, another reminder that all the different sections of this video tutorial are time stamped out. So you can see that along the timeline of this video, and also below in the description. As I mentioned before, YouTube has a cool feature. If you click on the time part on the left-hand side of that, then it will jump straight to that section. Because like we referenced at the very beginning, this video is designed as a tutorial, and hopefully you go out and give this a go. And a final reminder that the links to the other videos in the series will be down below. The very extensive video on Andreea actually carving this spoon from start to finish, which was the video just prior to this one that you're watching, as well as the ones that will proceed afterwards, because in the next installment we're going to be looking at Andreea's process for chip carving.
Yeah, we're going to use a different spoon, similar design, similar style of spoon, and we're going to chip carve it in a Romanian pattern.
I look forward to it. We've got a Romanian theme going on
in
here.
In a Romanian way.
We're just missing Romanian biscuits. That's the only.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the only thing we're missing out on, behind the scenes logistics. Right, so there you go. So links to everything down below in the description. And last but not least, will be links down below to Andreea's Instagram as well as her website. When you go and download the template, that will actually be on her website. Highly encourage you to go and look around on the website, join her email newsletter. You can see the myriad of work that she gets up to. Also on Instagram, once again, you can see the myriad of work that Andreea gets up to. She produces an array of beautiful, wonderful work. She travels a lot extensively, and she's also getting a lot bigger into the teaching aspects as well, here in the UK, across Europe and other countries as well. So to keep abreast of everything that she has going on, highly recommend you join her email newsletter when you go and visit her website. And last but not least, if you do give this a go, which is our encouragement to you, it will mean the world to Andreea if you tag her on Instagram.
That would be great. I would love to see what you do with this pattern or any pattern that's inspired by this. Or yeah, I'd love to see what you make. So please tag me. That'll be fun.
So there you go, man. That is a wrap for this video. I think we've covered everything. What do you think?
You did? Yeah, let's go chip carve something.
That's it. Let's go chip carve something now. So guys, really do hope you enjoyed this video. A sincere thank you once again, Andreea.
Thank you, Sid. Yeah.
So guys, links to everything down below in the description. Be sure to check out the previous video if you haven't done so already on carving the Romanian spoon. And I look forward to seeing you on the next installment, which is the chip carving process that Andreea incorporates into her practice. So as always, I really do appreciate you watching. And as always, I hope whatever you're doing, you have a blessed day, a blessed week ahead. From myself, Zed Outdoors, and Andreea Grad, peace out.